It's not a game, it's a rich thing.
Welcome to Devon Dragon Radio. I'm your host, M.L.Ruscsak. I'm here with author Elliot Mason. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, you have a wonderful book out. What is that about?
The book is called The Arlington Orders. It's actually would fall under, I guess, the historical suspense thriller fiction genre, but it's based on a real event. It's an event called the Dahlgren Affair, which happened in March of 1864. A young Union colonel by the name of Ulrich Dahlgren was killed right outside the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia. And when he was killed, they searched his body and they found a set of orders on him. And the orders said, you are to kill President Lincoln. You are to kill President Davis, Jefferson Davis, of the President of the Confederacy. You are to kill everybody in the Confederate government, and you are to burn Richmond to the ground. And this was kind of a shocking thing because at that time, there was kind of a gentleman's agreement that civilian heads of state wouldn't be targeted. So the South wouldn't target Lincoln and the North wouldn't target anybody in the Confederate government. Well, because of this, the South decided to evacuate the capital shortly afterwards. Getting the people out wasn't the problem. The problem was they had all of their gold and silver reserves, all of their money that they used to fight the war. So they literally devised a secret operation to move that gold and silver reserve out of Richmond down to Savannah, Georgia. And then they would sail it to an undisclosed location where they would draw on it when they needed the money.
Right.
They started the operation and it disappeared without a trace. And to this day, no one knows what happened to it. If it were discovered, it would be the most significant find and the richest find in American history. And my story takes place where two historians in modern times stumble upon clues and they start to search for it, but it turns into a deadly chase that could change the very future of the nation.
Well, okay. Let's go through with the historical facts. And everything that's going on in the world today, we need the historical facts out there.
Sure,
at the same time, we have this in the modern history, the search for this treasure. I mean, anything that's a search for treasure is automatically, I need to read it.
Yeah, I know I'm that way with books. But yes, it is an actual. There's been a lot of theories about what has happened to it. The reason they had to covertly move it is because Union troops were everywhere, so they couldn't just go and move it, on regular roads because it would be found and confiscated by Union troops. So there's a lot of theories. Some people say it's buried in a cemetery. Some people say that a man by the name of James Semple, who was supposed to be the person who received the shipment, took it. Other people say it was robbed along the route, but no one really knows. And there's a lot of theories out there, but it has never been discovered. But it was an actual treasury.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of historical people out there that have tried to find this mystery. What happened to the Confederate gold? Because like you said, it would be one of the richest finds in American history if it was found. We don't know where it is. No one does. But, it makes for a great tale to tell in a story.
Well, that's what I wanted to do. But I also, the story is not just about the search for treasure. It takes on a lot of dark political overtones because it covers a lot of what was going on during the war and how it affects us today, which is kind of ironic because you see the turmoil we're in today, especially over things like Confederate monuments and how we should view our history. So it kind of delves into that. And I have basically four main characters who are going after it. One is the two people who stumble upon clues by accident are two young historians volunteering at the Savannah Historical Foundation. And they stumble upon clues, and for them, it's kind of a way to give their meaningless lives meaning. They both are kind of lost souls. They feel that they haven't accomplished all the things that they've wanted to accomplish. So when they start searching for it, they have no idea that there's anybody else looking for it. And it turns out there are, and they have very different reasons. There's another character by the name of the Judge who wants it not only for its monetary wealth, but he always envisioned himself as doing something great and fantastic with his life. He wants to be thought of as in the same terms of some great leaders or great explorers. And then there's a 23-year-old disheveled young man by the name of William Hatton, who's searching for it as well with the Judge, but he never talks about the wealth. He only talks about its intended use, and you have no idea what he's talking about until you get to the, obviously to the end of the story. But
Right.
They all have this internal monologue going on of why they're doing this and the questions they're asking in their head, and the morality or immorality of some of our history. And it kind of becomes a political thriller that comes up to modern times.
It does. And right now, with our politics being disheveled and misinterpreted, with history not being taught, and it's a mess of political BS right now.
Oh yeah, that's for sure.
But at the same time, you have all that into this one book. You bring out the history, you bring out what they could have used for, you have the mystery of it, what they think now that they're doing things for, how they want to be looked upon now, these historians, and you have all of this mess together, but it makes for a wonderful read.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I enjoyed writing it. It took me about 2.5 years to research this book. And the Civil War is really unique to the American experience. There's nothing like it anywhere else in history, really. And it is so, and it's something that we still haven't come to terms with to this very day. The lingering effects of it, the legacy of things like that later happened after the war ended, Jim Crow and segregation and all these things that went on, and just how the nation viewed itself. One of the interesting things is I think people today, when they look at history, they tend to look at it through the eyes of a person living in the 21st century. And they don't understand that back then, if you asked a person living in America, where they were from, they wouldn't say, I'm an American first. They would say, I'm a Kentuckian, or I'm an Alabaman, or I'm a Mississippian, or a New Yorker. They identified with their region more than they identified with the country as a whole. Today, we say, I'm an American. But back then, it wasn't that simple. And America, people tend to forget that by the time the Civil War happened, America was even 100 years old yet. It was still this grand experiment. And no one at that time even knew it would even work. So I think it's really interesting how we are trying to look at it now. And I think people living in this generation have to be careful, because we have to understand that the way we see the world now is completely different than how people saw the world 150, 200 years ago.
I mean, that is a good point. And then we also have to look at it, what are we being taught from the history in the school? Are we being taught actual history, or are we being taught propaganda?
And that's, it's interesting. A couple of days ago, I received I have a Facebook page, and I received a question where someone made this statement. They said, well, they only want us to know the history they want us to know. And I can understand that. In school, history was taught a certain way, and it is changing. There's no question there's been a big move in how history is taught. But I think it's also very incumbent upon us as individuals. There have been literally thousands of books written on prominent historical figures like Lincoln and Jefferson and Washington and Frederick Douglass and all these very important historical figures. We need to, as a society, we also need to take a responsibility and say, you know what, it's up for us to get off our rear ends, go down to the library and check out these books for free that are available to us and read about them, because they are there.
Right. My mother, when I was growing up, we didn't just learn the history in school. She made sure our vacations were planned around a historical site, Gettysburg, places in Georgia, places where the Civil War actually happened, things that, so we can go and see the history, learn the history from that region.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to do it. And I think what is important is, in my opinion, is the context that we teach things in.
Mhm.
You know, our historical past, the historical figures, they were very multi-dimensional people. We tend to, I think in our own minds, we tend to put them up as these stoic figures that were single-minded and were without flaws. And there's, you know, there were some amazing people back then, but they were people,
Yes.
and they did have flaws. And like anybody else, they made mistakes and they made bad decisions, and they had quirks of their personality, and maybe they weren't the best people to get along. Like, you wouldn't want to be friends with them, but they still made important contributions. And I think we're torn about this a lot, you know. And even in modern history, where you get up more towards the 20th century, see people like that. Like, for instance, you look at a person like Henry Ford.
Mm-hmm.
Henry Ford was, you know, obviously did a huge amount to change the way we live now. Practically everything that we use, including the computer I'm talking to you on now, everything that we use is manufactured on an assembly line. That was Henry Ford's contribution. But he was also, had a lot of problems with anti-Semitism, so these people were flawed, and I think we have to look at the whole picture, and it gives us a better idea of what we're studying.
You can't look at one negative thing and say that the person was completely negative. What are their contributions? Why do we have a monument to this person? Okay, they were a Confederate, whatever. Well, there's a reason for the monument. Maybe good, maybe bad, maybe because of the war. We don't know. We have to research and then develop opinion. Thing with history is, you don't have to like history. It's not there for you to like or dislike. It's there for you to learn so we don't repeat it.
Sure. And, you know, I think it's important to look at every historical figure, even if you don't like them. You know, there's a lot of controversy about, you know, the Confederate monuments of people like Robert E. Lee. You know, but I think it's important to understand and study the man and find out, what was he about? What was his life about? What was he? It's interesting, you know, the Arlington Orders, which is the title of my book, a lot of people don't realize that Lee married George Washington's great granddaughter, who was his second cousin. And he in Arlington was actually a house. It was a place, it was built by George Washington's grandson to honor his grandfather. When the great-granddaughter inherited, General Lee, who was second cousin to Washington's great-granddaughter, they got married and actually lived in that house. When Lee was asked to join the Union Army and lead it, he refused and joined the Confederacy instead. The U.S. government confiscated the house and turned it into the Union headquarters in order to punish the Lee family for what they considered to be a treasonous act. They started burying Union war dead on the property, and that's how we get Arlington National Cemetery today. So
it's all history. Arlington, it goes right back to Washington, as you said, and it's all part of history. And history isn't a straight line; it's a messy ball of yarn that we have to go through and detangle and find little snippets. It's all there. I mean, Christopher Columbus. If I can talk today. Christopher Columbus, he discovered America. Well, if you ask any Native American, well, he can't discover something when it's already inhabited.
Right.
So,
and
yeah, it's a messy ball of yarn. It depends on what side you're looking at it from.
Sure. And if you look at like a person like Christopher Columbus, probably a better term was he introduced America to Europe, is probably a better way. A lot of controversy about him because of what happened with Native Americans and what happened with the aftermath of North America and South America basically being settled. But it is really a tangled web.
It really is. And taking some of these monuments down as a Native American descendant, I'm not full Native American, obviously, but as a descendant, I'm not offended by Christopher Columbus, although I don't like how it's portrayed because the history isn't portrayed equally.
Yeah, it is, and I can imagine as a Native American or a person who has Native American heritage in them, that would be a very, very complex set of issues. Obviously there were some very negative things that happened to the Native American population
Mhm.
with the introduction of Europe to, the New World. However, at the same time, a lot of the modern conveniences that we enjoy in life today wouldn't have happened if it had not been for that introduction. So I guess it is a very complex and emotional issue, and it's kind of interesting to see it play out now. The question is whether we will learn and reintroduce a new context of our history, or whether we'll just try to erase it from memory. And I think it's really dangerous when we erase things from memory. One of the things that you see, like for instance, a lot of Jewish people insisted that the things like Auschwitz and Dachau still stand. They wanted them to be a reminder of how horrible things can happen, and that it's a reminder that these things did happen. So I think that there's a lot of different ways we can look at it, but you're right, the context is very important.
Very true. So do we have any more books from you coming out?
Yes, I actually have a book coming out in the spring of 2021 called The Legal Killer, which tackles it's in some senses, it's a little bit of a sequel to what this book is, has some of the same characters, but the book is dealing with some very touchy issues in corruption within our federal justice system. And the book is basically tracks these problems and these injustices through the pursuit of a serial killer. And so that will be out in 2021. Again, it's called The Legal Killer.
That is going to be very interesting to read, especially with today's climate, because we're living in what we're seeing as a corrupt judicial system. We're living in this. We're not.
No question.
We're getting snippets. We're not getting the big picture.
Yeah, and I think that people today right now are focusing mainly on police, and that obviously is an extremely important issue,
Mm-hmm.
but it is just one part of the system as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And when we look at other things that come into play, the police, the prosecutors, the defense, judges, mandatory minimum sentencing, the guidelines, all these things that people don't see on because they're not in our face. Police is the most visible because it's something that the people have contact with. It's what we see when we drive down our streets. Sometimes we'll see a police car, or they're the ones that interact with the public more on a daily basis. But the whole system is massive, and people tend to forget about these other parts that play a huge role in how it operates. Exactly.
It's not just what we see, is everything that happens behind the scenes.
No question. And The Legal Killer really touches upon a lot of that, about some of the real fallacies we have in our justice system that basically cover the whole gambit of problems. I mean, everything from the private prison industry to just basically how the defense, for instance, like public defenders only receive about 5% of the funding compared to what 95% goes to the prosecution. Mm-hmm. So it's really a very uneven system, and it's that to me it needs every bit as much of a modification as any of the other issues that are happening currently.
Oh, I can't even agree with you on that, or not agree with you on this, because it's so behind the scenes corruption. It's not really corruption, it's just an unfair system to begin with.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of people look at it as and I see people who will, kind of poo-poo it and say, oh, well, it's not really, that's a conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theories I don't like them. This is out in the open. Mm-hmm. Last year, to give you an example, last year alone, companies involved in the private prison industry, and when you were talking about companies, you're talking about, not just the bars and the buildings. You're talking about the food contracts, sanitation contracts, clothing contracts, all the things it takes to operate a prison. they spend $250 million a year on lobbyists alone, combined. So they don't spend that kind of money if you're not expecting something in return.
Right.
They're no different than the auto industry or the pharmaceutical industry. They're interested in making money, and this is how they do it. And it's a real travesty, in my opinion.
Everything is based on money. We
Oh.
get rid of money and we go onto an honor system. Do we have the
Well,
same problems? I mean, this is a question. This isn't going to happen, but we look at it as money is the root of all evil.
right. And and normally I'm for government staying out of a lot of private things because but at the same time, the one thing I don't think should be monetized or incentivized with money is the justice system, because it leads to too many problems. And I said, I don't like government involved in a lot of things, but that's one thing that I think should not be in the private sector, because it leads to too much temptation for corruption. Yes.
I mean, you look at we went from a federal prison form to more privatized. As we do a privatized prison reform, now you have more inmates in there. Why? Because you're getting a kickback somewhere for having X amount of inmates in this prison. Then you have, on top of that, you have, the guards aren't being paid well. They don't have federal benefits. So they're taking people off the street and not really doing anything. So now you have your prison guards not treating your prisoners fairly because A, they're not trained, and B, there's no oversight.
No question. And I think also just to give you kind of some basic numbers, in the 1980s, when Ronald Reagan was in office, we had approximately 28,000 people in the federal prison system. Now we have 250,000. So we've had, this massive increase, just in the last 30 years. And you couple that with the fact that you don't count in, for instance, a lot of people look at what's going on at the border as a issue about immigration or humanitarianism, and they're missing the big picture. The same companies that make money off the federal prison systems are the same companies that operate the detention centers on the border. They're exactly the same, and they all have these massive contracts. And somehow, I never hear that talked about in any of the narratives. It's always about, and I understand why, because the detention centers are controversial, and we hear about the horrible separation of families and what's going on with children and so on and so on. But no one ever talks about these massive contracts that these companies have to operate these detention centers. And even though they are called federal detention centers, so much about them is privatized. The food that's provided, the sanitation that's provided, bedding, clothing, chairs, tables, everything is privatized. Exactly. And so maybe the building, the bars are federal, but everything else is privatized.
Yeah, and what people don't realize is when you privatize something, companies that make money are going to go with the cheapest materials, bedding, clothing, whatever, that they can to have a higher profit margin.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's crazy. And even things like the commissary companies, they bid on contracts because, hundreds of millions of dollars a year are just spent on commissary items by prisoners and their families. And those contracts of what's going to be in the commissary are all privately bid on, private companies, private contracts.
And it all goes to the lowest bidder. It doesn't go to the highest quality. It goes to the lowest bidder.
But no, never the highest quality.
No, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how that looks inside, but at the same time, I'm like, common sense says they're not going to get the best quality at the lowest price. That's business.
No. In fact, usually it's the lowest quality at the highest price. The research I did, it is amazing what they are charging for these items and how much money they're making. And really kind of interesting is that there's very little accounting of where that money goes. Ironically, a lot of that money that's spent on commissary, during my research, is supposed to go to prisoner recreation. But the numbers don't match up. They're making literally, some of these prisons are literally making millions and millions of dollars a year on commissary, but they can't afford to buy a basketball for prison recreation. So the numbers don't add up. So the question is, okay, where's that money going? And it doesn't, by any logical standard, it doesn't match up. And so there's things that that need to be looked into, and some real trying questions that we have to ask ourselves.
And this is very true. And this has to go across the board. It's not just one part of our civilization that needs to look at this. We need to open the books on every state, every city, everything, and look at the numbers.
No question, we have to do that. And I cover a lot of that in The Legal Killer. That in terms of, we have to ask ourselves a very basic question. The United States represents 5% of the world's population. We have 25% of the world's prison population, and we have 40% of the world's detained population. So the question we have to ask ourselves, how is it that the land of the free has more people in prison or detained than China, Russia, all of Eastern Europe, and all of Western Europe combined? How is that possible? Either we have to look and say, either Americans are the worst people walking the face of the earth because they can't stop committing crimes, or there's something wrong with our system. And I can't believe that Americans are any worse than any other population. So the question is that, what are we doing? Why do we have this need? And part of the problem is that our default button is always prison. Someone breaks the law, go to prison. Blah, blah, instead of, maybe what we can do is rehabilitate this person and maybe find other ways of having them contribute back to society. But, and there's the old adage, well, it operates as a deterrent. If it operates as a deterrent, why do we have so many people still in prison?
Right, it's not working. There's something not working within the system. We have to find it. But we're almost out of time, so where can our viewers find you? Okay,
they can find me. I have a website, ElliotMasonBooks.com. Again, they can find all the links. I have a newsletter that they can sign up for there, where they can get weekly or monthly updates on what's going on with me, appearances, signings, things of that nature. The Arlington Orders, the book that's out right now, is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Goodreads, a lot of different, Target has it. So a lot of different outlets, they can find the book there. If you want to learn more about the book, you can also sign up for the Arlington Orders Facebook page, which will kind of keep them up to date, and it discusses the issues that are going on today and how they relate to the book and vice versa. So that's kind of where they can find me.
That is wonderful. And thank you so much for being on the show today, Elliot. And I can't wait for your next one to come out, because that's going to be a real eye-opener.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And I hope we can talk again soon. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, of course. Just contact me when the book's out, because really this is a book that needs to be brought to everyone's attention.
I will be sure to do it, and fantastic. And I will be, happy to talk with you and discuss it. And I'm excited to do it.
Thank you so much. And for everyone out there, happy reading.